That being said, we talked about the drive line a little bit earlier, and if I were to gig on you guys on anything else, it would probably be this drive line not being lubricated as often as it should. Whenever you're greasing the chassis, make sure you're greasing this thing. If you have a crankshaft drive pump, one of the things that you'll notice about this one is that when we assemble this thing, all the grease fittings are in phase. You got a grease fitting here, you got a grease fitting here, and as close as we can get it to here and still be lined up. So everything's in phase. We try to do that when we assemble these drive lines to make it a little bit easier for you. Now, one of the things that you'll notice here too is we use a red grease. Red is the high temp grease. We use the high temp grease because it's stickier and it doesn't separate as easy. Not necessarily because we're exposed to high temperatures here, but mainly because it is a stickier grease and that it will hold with that U-joint a little bit better because we know it's going to tend to get neglected. Now, I realize that with the reel and the handheld, pistol on the grease gun and the big nozzle on it, it might be difficult to get to these, but I promise you, and you probably already got it in the shop, and if you don't, you need to get one because it'll work for a lot of different things, mowers and everything else. If you'll invest in a pistol grip grease gun with a flexible hose on the end of it, that's what you need. I can grease anything in the world as long as it's got a grease fit, and I've not seen anything I couldn't grease yet with that. So pistol grip grease gun with a flexible tip. Both hands are busy. You're busy with the grease fitting up here and you're busy pumping the grease down here. If you can't grease it with an automatic grease gun, it's for sure you can grease it with that because our guy that installs these drive lines makes sure that you're able to do that before he pulls it out of his bay to finish up his job. That's part of his inspection is to make sure that he can grease it that way if no other way. And, mowers and stuff like that, grease fittings are hard to get to, and that is another way that you can do that as well. Now, also on the filters, once in a while, we'll get a little bit of water in the hydraulic oil, and the oil will turn milky on us. Depending on how much water you got in it, you may be able to filter it out. This is something a lot of people didn't know, that you could actually remove water from the hydraulic oil if it's slightly milky. My rule of thumb is on this sight gauge right here, if it's milky enough that I can't see anything like these numbers or anything on the back side of this sight gauge, it's got too much water in it, I need to drain it out and start over again. But if I can faintly see, even if I can't read it, if I can faintly see, the lines or the numbers or whatever, if I can faintly see something, that's my gauge as, hey, filter might work. If I can faintly see something. If I can't see it, too much water, start over again. Drain it and refill and go from there. But even if you drain it and refill, think about it. Your cylinders are still full of oil. Your hydraulic lines are still full of this watery oil. So you're still going to have water in your hydraulic system. So he says, well, how do I get this stuff out of there? Now, what I'm getting ready to tell you don't necessarily apply to our snow removal dump truck. It applies to any hydraulics. Doesn't matter whether you work on an excavator, a backhoe, a mower, or a snow dump truck or whatever. This is general hydraulic knowledge. They make what they call an aquasorb element. Now, in this case, where we're not using spin-ons anymore, I would get me a base and I would insert this in my return line, break the line loose and run it through this thing and then back into the tank. And the slower you can push the oil through this, the better it's going to take water out of it. So if you put this thing in there and you just start the truck up and let the pump at an idle, that's the best thing you can do. Because the slower it goes through this filter, the better it's going to trap that water out of it and get that water out of the hydraulic oil. I've seen this happen many a time, and it works fairly well. And it's good general hydraulic knowledge that will be useful to you. But these aquasorb elements, a lot of people didn't realize it, and unless it's changed in recent years, anybody have any idea what the filter media is inside one of these things? Baby diaper. Pampers, whatever name it might be. I'm not a proponent of those because my kids are grown and gone. I got grandkids now. But the same things that they put in a baby diaper are the same things that are in here, and it's meant to absorb water. It'll let the oil pass through it, but it absorbs the water in the oil as long as it's passing by slow. So that was an interesting thing that I found out years ago about these, because I've used these from time to time when we've had an issue or accidentally customer put some dirty oil in it or whatever. I've gone out in the field and used these, and they work really well. They work really well. How much oil will this thing collect? probably about as much as you can hold in the palm of your hand, which is not a lot. But think about it, it don't take a lot of water to mess up hydraulic oil. It don't take a lot. So it probably would hold a little bit more than that. But the warmer the oil is, and the slower you can pass it through that filter, the more efficient it is about separating the water and the oil there and clearing it up. So good tidbit of information. Another thing, this is good general information for hydraulics in general, and then we'll get back to the subject with some programming and stuff, is heating in a hydraulic system overheating itself. It doesn't matter what it's on, mower, excavator, dump truck, whatever. If you've got a hydraulic system that's overheating itself, there's something that's causing the heat. It just don't happen by itself. Something is causing the heat. So there is a heat generator somewhere. So if you've got one of these heat guns in the shop, and back in the old days I didn't, I had my hands, and that's all I had, you know, to be able to detect something hot. But if you've got a heat gun in the shop, let that hydraulic system cool down. Even if it's overnight, let it cool down and come back the next day and fire that thing up. And as it starts warming up and it gets up to, let's say, hot water temperature, 120 degrees, then I'm out here with this heat gun. I'm shooting a pump, I'm shooting a tank, shooting valves, motors, you know, anything that oil is flowing through, I'm shooting these things to find out what is hot. Something's hotter than the rest of it. Something's causing the heat in the hydraulic system. And more times than not, you have any idea what it might be? Quick disconnect. A lot of times it's a quick disconnect, because what'll happen is that when the operator goes out there to the job site and he loads up his spreader and he's got pressure on this line, what does he do? Bam, 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 to pop this thing in to relieve that pressure on the quick disconnect, and it batters up the end of this just enough that it doesn't push it back quite far enough to fully engage or to fully open the poppet, and it creates a restriction going through it. So about 2/3 of the time when there's a spreader involved with it, about 2/3 of the time it'll be that quick disconnect. I found that from experience of doing this a lot. So that's the first thing I would start looking for if you ever had a problem with that is if it's heating because the spreader is working, check your quick disconnects first. And what you're going to find if you don't have a heat gun and the oil temperature starts rising, I don't necessarily condone this, but lay your hands on these components. And if you got any leaks, absolutely don't do that. A lot of people don't realize, you know how many PSI of hydraulic oil, of pressure that it takes to pierce your skin? 19 PSI, that's all it takes. A little pinhole leak on hydraulics, it only takes 19 PSI. Have you seen some of the pictures of when it happens? That's some bad looking stuff. You don't want that to happen. But on these hydraulic components and stuff like that, as long as you don't have any leaks and you don't have a heat gun, just lay your hands on the pump and disconnects and things like that. You're gonna find something in it that's hotter than anything else. And when it's hotter than anything else, that's where your problem's at, guaranteed. There's an old man that's dead and gone now that taught me that, and it's good general hydraulic knowledge as well as the AquaZorb element. Okay.